Hello, Brandon here with Minnesota Blockchain Initiative. This is the MN Blockchain Conversations podcast, but this time we're not in the Quantum Lex studio in Minneapolis. We took the show on the road. While attending the Crypto City Summit at Infinita.city on Roatan Island, Honduras, I sat down with a couple of the event's presenters, author Max Borders and blockchain project founder David Johnston. Here I speak with Max, author of The Social Singularity and Underthrow, about how today's technology doesn't just change how we communicate or conduct finance, it's having us restructure our societies altogether. Enjoy.
You're an author, you write all about how technology is influencing our societies.
That is true, certainly. If you were to sort of zoom in on it a little more, it's in particular how technology has the ability to decentralize power in society.
Yeah, how it shapes society. Influence could mean, any technology.
Well, exactly. And of course, I also write about the downside of that, how technology can concentrate power and authority too.
There does seem to be that, because I've given similar, at least I've touched on this in conversations, and people are quick to say something like, well, yeah, technology gives us the ability to be our own creators and, this in general decentralizes power, but it also allows them to have cameras at every traffic light, and that kind of surveillance thing.
And they're not wrong.
They're not wrong. I maintain that the balance does tend to favor decentralization, though. Do you agree with that? Or does it depend on the society? Because you might go China way or it might go
Well, this is the question, really. I think we're at a strange, what I would call a liminal moment, or if you like, a fork in the road. We can go the way of China, which is social credit system,
right,
centralized digital currencies and so on, or we can go the decentralist route, which is decentralized currencies, more special jurisdictions that have their own rights of self-determination and variation among the people, cultural self-determination. So it'll be interesting to see which fork we take, particularly in the United States, where I think you and I.
Yeah, Minnesota.
Yeah. So.
And you're in Texas?
I'm now in South Carolina. I moved back to the East Coast.
Okay. Well, what really interests me is it isn't so much China, because that to me is very logical, right? Yeah. They're more of a top-down society, so they're simply using a top-down fashion. Great Chinese firewall, etc. But the U.S., the land of the free, but we've got this monstrous government. There's a paradox there. And as we're seeing now with Elon Musk and Doge, there's a lot of resistance to giving up, from both the public and the government, hey, you're cutting off our funding, hey, you're cutting off these programs, etc. But then I suppose also in a darker corner of some politicians' hearts, it's like we're losing our power here.
And all the special interests that accrete around Washington. I mean, that is, we're hearing the lamentations of people who don't like transparency, and they don't like transparency because they're a favored constituency group that risks losing its gravy train.
Right.
But we have, the federal government has become a vast gravy train that rains privileges on constituency groups, and we can't afford it anymore.
You take a bigger picture though, right? Many people are writing in Politico or Wall Street Journal or New York Times about this tug of war going on, or whether we should cut U.S. aid or whether we should, whatever, Department of Education. From what I understand and what attracted me to you, when I first found you a few years ago, and then I saw you speak at ETH Denver a couple of years ago. And then I read Social Singularity, and it was some talks and podcasts that you've done. You're look at this on a 500-year time frame, sovereign individual kind of philosophy, where this isn't about whether U.S. aid or the Department of Education is going to, how much money they're going to get, or even if they're going to exist. You're talking about the fate of the country itself.
I wouldn't say 500 years. That's probably too far out into the future to be able to predict with any kind of accuracy, much less
I meant
catalyze.
Because in that book, we talk about the printing press.
Exactly.
And what it did to the Reformation.
Exactly.
And now we've got our printing press, the internet.
No, okay, fair point.
Yeah.
So from a sort of looking at these epochs in history, how we communicate, how we exchange, and how that is enabled through technological means, looking at it through a 500 years time horizon, I like to show people that basically since the great enrichment, the hockey stick of prosperity since 1800, we went through the Industrial Revolution and into the digital age, in 200 years out of 2000, more than 2000 really.
Yeah.
And so there is certainly this lateralization that's happening, but technologies that can lateralize can also.
What's lateralize?
Well, make connections between and among people that are side to side equal relationships of collaboration and exchange, communication, and so on, that are voluntary, that are consensual. Whereas something like, the example we use is a Chinese social credit system says if you stay within these parameters and behave the way we want you to behave, we won't rock the boat, we won't appropriate your funds or what have you.
Very top down.
Very top down. And that's not a lateral set of relationships. That's as you put it, top down, and I think it's perfectly said. And so, technology has the means for us to take either one of those forks. Because these lateralization technologies, these peer-to-peer technologies are becoming more easier to access and more popular, I think we're going to see a sea change or an inflection point beyond which it's going to be exceedingly difficult for the powers that be to prevent people from establishing peer-to-peer relationships. That inflection point, you said you read the book, The Social Singularity. That's the social singularity. The point beyond which it becomes too costly to rein in peer-to-peer relationships. And it runs in parallel with the technological singularity, which is the point in the future at which processing power or the machines are smart enough to wake up and become, AI's, artificial general intelligence and all that good stuff. So that process is working in parallel with this social singularity, which is how low cost is it for me to collaborate with you?
Right. Why is that a threat to the national political infrastructure? I'm guessing, at least for me, when you mention, people are it's lateralizing, I'm thinking, a YouTube creator can now reach his or her audience directly. You don't need a TV network or something like that in between them. How does that, web of connections, lateralizing everyone, a threat to just the current structure we have, the representative democracy that we have in the U.S.?
So I think of it like this. There's a guy named Mansur Olson who's, I think, from Minnesota, your home state. He had this theory in economics or political science called concentrated benefits, diffuse costs. Okay, that dynamic has held sway for thousands of years. Simply said, when you have government power that concentrates benefits on special interests, it becomes a low-cost proposition for those special interests to gain those political relationships and form that to basically drink from the trough, the redistributive trough. Okay, so we call that special interest capture.
Right.
And as we started this conversation, we were talking about how the United States government has become too bloated. It reigns too much on these favored constituency groups.
Right.
And when you try to take that away, they're screaming and crying because they're going to be denied their gravy train. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the diffuse costs part of this means that it has been up to this point nigh impossible for people to gain the requisite knowledge of who and what is a favored constituency group, much less how they're funded. So let's say you have a mohair subsidy. The mohair subsidy was started during World War II, just subsidizing, mohair. It's kind of goats, basically. The hair of goats that they made jackets out of.
All right. I didn't know.
Well, the mohair subsidy has never ended. But we subsidized mohair because of the war, but it never went away.
Yeah.
But no individual voter has the requisite knowledge or impetus to go fight the mohair subsidy.
Yeah.
But now there's a change. So, for example, with the transparency measures that Elon Musk and his team is taking, and then advertising that on X, X is not decentralized, but it's dispersing the information to a very high degree. And we now know there's a national appetite to rein in spending on the part of voters. It's like, we've got to do this. It's now or never. We've got to turn the ship, or we're going to have sovereign default or hyperinflation or both. Okay, that's not good. So whether or not you like Elon Musk, he has tapped into something in the popular psychology. It's like, okay, now we understand we're wasting money.
Right.
And this process of concentrated benefits, diffuse costs is being disrupted. So with peer-to-peer technologies, like blockchain and so on, and the convergence of that with AI, we're really now beginning to see how transparency measures can be introduced. We can also imagine a future in which the CIA doesn't take out Elon Musk because it pissed off at him, or whatever body, right? Because Elon Musk represents a threat to that old order. If you have something like an X that is built on Nostr, which is uncensorable, the information is going to get out, and there's nothing they can do about it. So concentrated benefits to diffuse costs inverts. And it's like concentrated costs of enforcement on the part of the old order and diffuse empowerment on the part of new constituency groups, now armed with information.
So it's sort of an economic model that's put into a social situation or scenario.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a part of a political science arm called public choice theory.
Okay.
But the basic idea is, it used to be that special interests were unstoppable because voters were ignorant. I mean, ignorant in a rational way. We just don't know all that goes on.
Right.
People are learning things every day about where tax money is going. And when you couple that with monetary policy, it means that the Federal Reserve has to print money in order to accommodate all the spending done by Congress or the executive, or the executive. It's game over. But that dynamic is changing. Now it's becoming more costly to cover up these unholy alliances between business and government, for example, or special interest in government. And people are now empowered with technological means to discover that information. And that's going to be unstoppable.
Do you think, though, that the system is just antiquated? So even if Elon Musk can cut and Trump can cut whatever they want, it's kind of like rearranging deck chairs on Titanic.
I worry about that.
Yeah.
And it's a valid concern, because the power of special interests has been the norm in human history, right? I mean, this is how you get aristocracies. They become a dependent class. And the unholy alliances between corporations and governments are very difficult to stop or disrupt. People think that because they go to the voting booth and cry their teardrop in the ocean, the tide is going to turn.
Yeah.
But it almost never does. But with these technological means, in other words, imagine an uncensorable X. Like they could find a way to shut X down.
Yeah.
They could say it's a national security problem. But if you have something that's based on cryptographic peer-to-peer technologies that's very costly or almost impossible to censor, it's game over. You just need to give people the ability to push that information out to the popular mind.
I don't know if that's where the school of mainstream, like the school of fish, where he's going to go. Like, if it's a lot of work. I mean, I observe this in China, and I guess I'm comparing in some way Americans to Chinese in some way.
Sure.
Or like the Chinese, I wrote a blog when I lived there teaching English, and it was blocked. And I said, well, just use a VPN. And they just didn't bother, because I don't know. They're just like, well, I just won't read it. I'm like, well, just use a VPN. But it was just a lot to ask, I guess, of them. I don't know if it was they were worried about it. I just think they thought, nah, and And so I think most Americans would have that kind of same shrug around using Nostr, because it's like, how important really is it? I don't know.
Well, it depends on the way. Yeah, there are definitely.
If you're a whistleblower, maybe, but.
Right. Well, there are network effects associated with Facebook and Twitter, and they're very hard to overcome.
Yeah.
But if these were ever shut down and people felt like they were being censored and didn't have any access to these communication tools, they might start to embrace them. And that would be the difference. That would be really an inflection point.
I want to get to the good stuff because we only have a few more minutes, I think.
Okay.
We're here at a conference that's talking about like alternatives to the usual standard country, right? And this is really the kind of the understanding of the world that is, I think, being challenged at conferences like this. And I mean that in a good way. It's being, I don't know, challenged, like fighting or something like that. No, I just mean there's alternatives now. We're adding to how we can arrange societies. And right now we think of 192 countries and that's it. But, we're here to define something else. And you want to offer a few thoughts on, I guess, in general, startup societies?
Yeah, I mean, when we first started talking about there's a couple of dynamics. One is called voice, the exercise of expression, right? So we've been talking about how expression can change popular psychology, that can affect voting patterns, right? In the classical way that we engage in politics. With exit, you're talking about leaving a system to start a new system.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're talking, so startup societies are special jurisdictions that are usually embedded within another larger society where they carve out a legal framework that allows flexibility with respect to corporate law and things like that. What that allows for is more options. So we're right now in Prospera, which is a ZEDE, a special economic zone in Honduras. It's been controversial and so on, but it's building up fast. The commercial activity is already here. And so Prospera doesn't see itself as a government. It sees itself as a provider of governance services. So people aren't subjects or citizens, they're customers. And that might sound a little bit bourgeois, but think about it. If your job is to serve a customer so as not to lose them, you're going to provide better governance services. You're going to give people what they want, not force stuff down their throats. When you have competitive dynamics at play with a marketplace for governance, that's a game changer. The Swiss, for example, right now, the Norwegians just created a tax that affected a bunch of billionaires in Norway. And what these wealthy Norwegians did is they said, great, we're going to go to Switzerland. And they camped in some canton or other in Switzerland. And now they're enjoying the benefits of the Swiss jurisdiction and the protection of the Swiss jurisdiction. We call that jurisdictional arbitrage, moving between jurisdictions where you get a better deal.
Sure.
So now these billionaires are living in Switzerland and they're having to say goodbye to their mother country, Norway, but Norway did not provide government services that help them continue to grow their wealth. And of course, we could say, well, that's, the egalitarians among us would say, oh, they're just not wanting to pay their fair share and this and that. But the thing about billionaires is usually they're stewards of capital, and capital is being deployed. If you require them, say, to have, I think in Norway they had a unrealized capital gains tax. That's just requiring you to just eat away at wealth that's already been deployed. That's not a good thing for society.
Yeah, it's been mentioned in the U.S. too.
Yeah,
at least discussed. And so Prospera and other zones like it perhaps offer another alternative. So it's not just existing 192 countries vying for, which is actually quite a few competitors already, I guess. But Prospera offers something unique. Yeah, it's a way of tailoring. I guess this might be a conversation to have with Eric or something, but it offers a way of tailoring the particular legality that you want to be under while you're here, so it is more flexible than any one geographic nation state.
Right. So there are two really great innovations about Prospera that I will mention. Never mind that their default is, and I have a lot of bias towards English common law
Mm-hmm.
or Anglo-Saxon common law versus French or Roman civil law. Two vastly different kinds of law. And one is much more easily corrupted, and that's the civil law. So they start with the English common law. However, there are two innovations that are really interesting to Prospera. The first is that you can choose your regulatory framework for what you do.
Yeah.
So if you're a company that serves the Japanese and you just want to manufacture here for low taxes or do something for the Japanese market, you may go ahead and adopt the Japanese regulatory framework so that you can introduce your goods and services into Japan,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So that's interesting. So it becomes a menu of regulatory options.
Yes. Yeah.
The second is the idea that you can have regulation without regulators. And instead, you think of it as insurance terms. If you buy insurance and you take undue risks, the insurance company is going to push back on you and going to raise your premiums.
Mm-hmm.
So to get those premiums down, you need to come into risk compliance with your activities. That is a market mechanism that sort of equilibrates that and balancing risk and risk taking and self-regulation. That piece of it is really interesting in Prospera too. They rely on the insurance versus the regulatory model if you want.
Let's wrap up because I think this is 2 o'clock or an hour. Okay, it's almost 2. Could you take like a minute? Because I listened to a podcast this morning you were on, and I really love your message of like optimism, because you have to really kind of thread the needle here, right? Like you recognize that, you know, despite what's happening in the U.S., you say, oh, you know, Elon's cleaning it up or whatever. If you're of that persuasion, it's like maybe not. You know, like maybe we need to build something new. Like kingdoms had to go, you know, by the wayside in place of the nation state. Maybe we need something. And I remember in that podcast you said, but I'm not a doomsday prepper. You know, I see things struggling. I see countries struggling to contain and keep the peace, and there's all this chaos happening in the world. But I'm not a doomsday prepper because I believe in building and I'm an optimist. Can you talk about kind of threading that needle where, you know, you don't have your head in the sand, you're recognizing what's happening. In fact, I'd say you're one of the few that really have a very sharp perspective on the present and the near future of societies on planet Earth, politically especially. But yet you're an optimist, and you talked about you know, family, community, and just like building and I don't know, talk about remaining positive and you know, kind of like the talk you had this morning, you know, virtuous while also recognizing that things are kind of getting messy.
They're going to be messy. We're in that liminal stage. You know, I don't think one way or the other about Trump, except that he's a chaos agent in a way. And, you know, whether and to what extent he's being constitutional or unconstitutional with his measures, what I see is a moment where those who are building and operating within this transitional stage have a window to establish new constituency groups around new innovations in governance, in technology, and so on, that had not been there prior to the election. So I don't want to get political with it. What I do want to do is get more communitarian. And what I mean by that is there's no way to make positive social change in the world with a nihilistic outlook. You've got to start with optimism. Not being unrealistic, certainly not ungrounded optimism, but a background, wind in your sails of optimism. So you have a vision on the horizon, and that vision is to realize, in some sense, the original good old American Jeffersonian vision of the consent of the governed, right? A more voluntary, decentralized society where you can opt into jurisdictions that are right for you. 50 jurisdictions and innumerable counties and cities, right? So the more we decentralize authority out of Washington and into the various places, if you want to talk about the United States, or if you want to talk about moving to a special jurisdiction like Prospera, that these represent your values and your conception of the good. If you marry that with that sense of optimism to build that for your family and become more efficacious in doing so, you're only going to be able to succeed with that optimistic one in your sales. I don't see any other way around it. And positive psychology bears this out. The famous positive psychologists, starting with Csikszentmihalyi, all the way up to, oh gosh, his name has gone right out of my mind.
You'll tell me later, and I'll flash it on your chest in the video.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're gonna figure out who this guy is, and my old man brain is taking it right out of my mind. But he's a contemporary positive psychologist, and he argues based on his research that you're far more likely to succeed in any endeavor if you have that as a sort of dispositional starting point.
It seems so obvious, but yet the people who like to mention the corruption, like an Alex Jones or, I don't know, the preppers, right? I mean, it's very negative. And so to be able to recognize the chaos but keep positive is another reason I really like your work and your message.
Yeah, you got to cut through all this. And right now is a time where there's just a lot of voices. There's just a lot of cacophony.
Mm-hmm. People
are arguing. You talked a moment ago about a political tug of war. Mentally in your mind, don't engage in the tug of war. Cut the rope. And by cut the rope, I mean get out of that dynamic where there's push and pull, partisan push and pull, because you're wasting energy on pulling when you can be exercising energy on building something new, an alternative for people to opt into, and do it with optimism.
That's great. That's a fantastic final message. Thanks so much for your time
Hey, thank you very
during
much.
this conference, Max. All right.
My pleasure.